Christmas is almost here, and if you have a home bartender or an aspiring home bartender in your life, you might be looking for ideas for gifts to give them. Well, I've got you covered. I'm Matt, I'm the Whiskey Nerd, I'm a bit of a home bartender myself, and in this video I'm going to talk about 10 different gift ideas for home bartenders, because sometimes it can be hard to kind of look at all the different bar tools, all the different bits of equipment that are out there and see what's actually good, what's actually going to be useful, especially at different prices. So I've got a range of things from gift ideas that are going to be quite cheap all the way up to something that's pretty darn expensive but very, very useful. So let's get right into it. First off, probably the most important thing is a good shaking tin and a good mixing glass. Now, mixing glass, quite important, like obviously a little strainer and a spoon, but like your basic, these I think are just your basic, your core, you have to have them. If you are an aspiring home bartender, something like this, where that glass is quite strong, so you can make loads of cocktails, you can stir things in there, you know you're not going to chip it, you know you're not going to chip any aspect of this, so you can make lots of cocktails and it won't break. It'll last you a long time. So good quality things, obviously a little strainer to catch the ice, and I think those are really, really important. When it comes to shaking tins, a lot of people will have something like this. This is like kind of like baby's first cocktail shaker. It's oftentimes you see it in like gift packs, you see it in like college kind of bartender. It's not great. It has this kind of like rubberized seal there. For me, they're not that great. For me, the best kind of shaker is this tin on tin Boston style shaker, where you can bang it down and it gives you a really good seal. You can drop this on the floor. I've dropped this many times and you're not going to break it. It's not like a piece of glass where it's going to shatter. It gives you a really, really good seal and they're really, really good quality. Again, I've used this for years and it's still perfect, still as good as new. These ones as well, these are the Mezclar brand, and they've got, as you can see here, this kind of extra bottom of this extra piece on the bottom. This gives it a bit of weight. So if you want to try a bit of flair, you know that it's gonna like has this weight down the bottom, so you can kind of throw it around between your hands. You know it's gonna land, you know where it's gonna be. So for me, a good quality shaker tin and a good quality mixing glass are essential. If they've already got those though, if they've got like the basic quality, maybe get them a better version of it. Maybe get a really nice kind of bar spoon where it has a bit of like strength to it, because sometimes for cracking ice, a good spoon is better than those simple kind of cocktail stirrers. So for me, absolute essentials for home bartenders. Next up, number 2 on my suggestion of very good gifts for home bartenders is the essential glassware. Now you can get simple enough kind of patterns glassware like this. This I think came from IKEA. Very, very simple, respectable, simple enough glassware, or you can get something a bit better. So you can get like this. This here is a crystal old-fashioned glass. They both have the same kind of idea, but this one I think is just a little bit better. It has that weight on the bottom. It's crystal clear, so you know it's always gonna be good quality. But when it comes to other cocktails, like a good Nick and Nora glass, or sorry, this is a good coupe, and a good Nick and Nora glass, or even a really nice highball glass. And you can see these all have like the same pattern going across them. So for me, I think a good glassware, a good presentation really impacts the enjoyment of a cocktail. Yes, you can serve every kind of cocktail in this kind of glass or the highball kind of glass. Ultimately, it's the drink you're drinking. But when it comes to something like a whiskey sour, where you want that nice foamy head, a coupe glass works really well, because if you serve it in a highball, you're going to get a lot of head and then the cocktail beneath it. Whereas in a coupe, that wide kind of brim lets you spread that head out. Same thing with like if you're drinking like a highball, something where you want a bit of length to it, you can put a nice bit of ice in there, you can pop a straw in it, whereas you can't pop a straw in something like a Nick and Nora, whereas a Nick and Nora is great for those kind of simple, small cocktails that you don't serve on ice, where there's no head on it, and it's just a nice, simple, something like a Negroni or something like that. You can pop it in a cocktail like this, really, really enjoyable. And again, a wide brim one like this here, where you can pop in a nice rock of ice for like an old fashioned or something like that, like a Boulevardier, a cocktail where you want it to sit, you want to maybe a nice bit of ice in there, keep it nice and cold. It just makes, I think, for a better kind of cocktail experience than for those kind of simple glasses. and especially good for a gift because you can get a nice set of these. You can get like 4 glasses, or you can get 2 of each of these glasses. You can get something like that, and it comes out as a really nice gift idea. For our next couple of gift ideas, we're going to be sticking with like the practical up front, because again, if you're starting off in home bartending, like you want something a bit practical. So for me, this right here is a bit of fun. It's called a juice elbow. So it's looks like an elbow, like an elbow, and you can essentially put a bit of citrus, a bit of fruit in there, and you squeeze it down. It's really handy for making like one cocktail at a time. It's one of those cocktail kind of bar tools where you'll see in proper bars. You'll see them, they'll throw it out, pop in a bit of citrus, close it down, and squeeze it, and you get that fresh squeezed citrus like right in front of you. It also means that you're not like wasting, so you're not like juicing a load of oranges, juicing a load of lemons or limes. You're making like one cocktail at a time. I think if you do have that kind of home bartender in your life who's making more than one cocktail, a good juicer, like actually something like this can be better, because especially if you're making like batches of cocktails, or you know you're having people over, you're going to need a lot of lemon juice or a lot of lime juice, you can batch up a lot with something like this. But if you're just making that one at a time, or you want to kind of have that craft individually kind of made cocktail, something like this, like the juice elbow, it's something that's a little thoughtful, especially something that someone might not get for themselves, because they're not expensive, but it just seems a little frivolous. But actually I think they're fun to use, and it adds a little bit of flair to someone who's making cocktails. Speaking of flair, and maybe taking something that's a little bit standard but making it a little bit better, when you're making cocktails, you will of course need a cocktail measure. And yeah, you could have something like this, something quite simple, but for me, I really like the Difford's measure. This is from Difford's. If you're familiar with cocktails, you'll know about the Difford's website. They kind of put out loads of different cocktail recipes, really, really cool. And this here is their own designed measure. I know it kind of seems a bit excessive to go as a measure, as a gift, but this has a load of really cool features. So for example, if you're using a cocktail with ingredients like sugar syrup, and you want to pour it all out, sometimes it sticks at the bottom. So this has these 2 little nubs there, so you can hang it on the edge and it won't fall off, and you can get all those ingredients and let them all drip out of it. It's also got really, really precise measurements, so it's down to 1.25 milliliter or 1/24 of an ounce. So sometimes when you're making a cocktail that needs like absinthe, needs an ingredient that's really, really like strong in flavor, but you only want a tiny amount of it, a measure like this won't do you any good, because the smallest measure here is half an ounce or 15 milliliters. This one here, it goes down to 1/24 of an ounce or 1.25 milliliters, and it goes all the way up to 60 ml. So you have the entire range of measures you need in this one kind of simple cocktail measure. It also has some like a bit of flat edges there, so you can like pour. It just makes it's really, really well designed, and it's not a feature I use a lot, but it has a little bit of a magnet there, so it hangs on the edges. So if you have limited space, or you've got like a small area where you want all your ingredients to hand, you can have your measure there on the side of your home bar. Very, very simple, but it adds, as a gift, it's one of those things that's very thoughtful, and I think very good idea. And the last of our kind of like practical ideas are these here, storage bottles. And I know it sounds a little bit simple, like storage bottles. These are just 2 glass bottles, but for me, they're really, really important. When I'm making recipes, if I make like a sugar syrup, I need somewhere to store that sugar syrup. So for me, these little small bottles that are airtight, that I can seal, I can put them in the fridge, whether I'm making like a tea syrup or like a homemade demerara sugar syrup, things like this. I've actually got like 6 of them. So whether it's juices or sugar syrups, I will, especially when I've got people coming over, I'll make up a couple of syrups, throw them in the fridge, and then if I'm like, oh hey, do you want an old fashioned with a pear syrup? I can do that. Do you want an old fashioned with a tea syrup? Do you want a whiskey sour with that pear syrup? I can mix and match, and it lets me make kind of fun cocktails without having to go through a lot of stress. I can have a bunch of syrups batched up, keep them airtight, let them last a bit longer in the fridge, and just something, again, in that practical vein where it's something that you wouldn't think about up front, but for home bartenders, very, very important. Likewise, these, kind of like, this is a 200 ml bottle with a cork, very, very simple, but it's the kind of thing if you want to batch up cocktails. Let's say you're going over to a friend's house and you're like, oh, maybe you can get a bigger one of this. You can get something like this here, which is for For punches, when I've got people over and I'm making a big punch, I put it in here. It has this kind of spout tap. And for cocktails where I want to have a lot of cocktails, something like this, but sometimes ones like this where it's only 200 ml is where it's at. Oh, let me just put that back. So yeah, sometimes you just want like a couple of old fashions. You're going over to a friend, you'll go, oh, I'll bring over like 3 or 4 old fashions, and maybe I'll bring over like a Negroni or like something else like a daiquiri. You bring over a couple of these and you have a couple of different cocktails ready to go. You can leave them in the fridge, you can leave them in the freezer, and they're just ready to go. Pour out a cocktail. It's very handy, and it saves you the effort of, if you've guests over, of batching up a cocktail, going off to make something now. You can have it just ready to go. Next up, it's just going to be like a little bit of a gadget, a little bit of a gizmo, something that a lot of us will have seen if we've seen cocktail home bartender kind of gear. It's this here right here. This is a little cocktail smoker. It comes with a bunch of different types of wood. This is like apple wood chips. Basically, you put some of these wood chips into the top here, into that little grate. You use a lighter, you smoke it, and essentially what happens is the smoke comes down out of there and it smokes your cocktail. It can be a bit of fun, it can be a bit of an interesting presentation. It can take like a classic cocktail, like an old fashioned, and make it just like a bit more rounded out. It can add a few different notes to it. And so for me, it's like a little gizmo. If you have a home bartender in your life and they have kind of everything already, they have all the shakers, they've got all the little syrup storage bottles, they've got all the good measures, something like this can be a bit of fun. It can be something different, something that maybe they haven't tried out yet, and just something a little bit different. It's a little bit of a gizmo. If you're stuck for ideas, it's also not very expensive, so it's that kind of idea of, if you're maybe getting them something else, you can then add something like this onto the top, and it's very, very simple. Speaking of adding an extra layer to kind of cocktails, bitters. And so bitters, you can kind of start with a standard kind of like Angostura bitters, which are classic. You can go with your Angostura orange bitters again, but then you go into weird and wonderful bitters. You got things like this, whiskey barrel bitters. You got these ones here that are designed exclusively for use in like mules, in like a highball, like an Irish mule, Moscow mule, things like that, where it adds a little bit of extra flavor. You've got rhubarb bitters. They come in mint, there's walnut bitters, cardamom, there's loads of different flavors of bitters. And for me, bitters are one of those things that can really add a new dimension to a cocktail. If you make an old fashioned using classic Angostura versus whiskey barrel aged bitters, completely different flavors. So it's one of those things that, if again, like you got that home bartender in your life and they have all the stuff already, get them a couple of different types of bitters, lets them take all the recipes they're familiar with and change them a bit, add a new dimension, add a new flavor to them, and just kind of change things up a bit, give them new ideas for different recipes to make it. So for me, bitters are one of those things you could never have enough of, because they're all different, they all add different kind of layers to an ingredient. It's just a great little idea for a cocktail enthusiast to try out different types of ingredients. Speaking of different types of ingredients, I mean, if you've got a home bartender in your life, they might need ingredients. They might need base spirits. So whether it's, I'm not gonna go down to my home bar, but I've got in there, I've got a gin, a rum, a light rum, a dark rum, a whiskey, and a vodka at all times, because that lets me make kind of any kind of cocktail I want. So base spirits are sometimes kind of expensive. So again, if you got someone who's maybe starting off and you get them like that mixing glass, you get them that shaker tin, get them maybe a bottle of vodka, bottle of whiskey, and a bottle of rum, and kind of let them start off, so that gives them the base to make a bunch of different cocktails. Lets them explore and experiment, and kind of takes that initial kind of financial hit out of the way. But also, if you're going to a friend's house and they're making you loads of cocktails, you can say, well, here, look, I'll look at their, you look at their shelves, you say, oh, what's the kind of the whiskey they use, what's the gin they use, the rum they use, go, oh, cool, I'll remember that, and I'll get them a bottle of that, so that next time I come over, I can say, here, instead of bringing like a bottle of wine, you can go, here is a bottle of rum. So for when they make the cocktails for you, you can enjoy them, but also you're giving something a little bit back. So those kind of like base spirits, always welcome for home bartenders. Before I go into my last two ideas, which are going to be a little bit more expensive, I'm going to tell you about kind of ideas for stocking stuffers. And so for me, things like this, things like these kind of garnishes, whether it's dried blood orange, dried lime, pineapple flowers, or things like these. These are like ice molds, so you can get like proper cubes of ice, big for like old fashions, or these kind of like spears of ice where you get these really nice spears of ice for, especially like a highball where you got that tall glass. You can drop in like a spear of ice and it looks really, really good. These are like stocking stuffer ideas. These are things that aren't very expensive. I think these molds were like, this was like 5-6 euro. This was like 5-6 euro. These are all, I think, also not very expensive. They're kind of like, again, I think these were like 5 euro-ish, something like that. And they last for months and they give you this really cool kind of presentation. They lets you take a cocktail and just add another layer to it. Taking like a piece of dried lime, floating on top of a cocktail really changes the kind of experience and lets someone take like a home cocktail from something that's nice and enjoyable into something that's a bit of an experience that shows that it's kind of like almost custom made, and lets someone show off the kind of the flair, the craft that they're developing. So those are really good kind of ideas for little stocking stuffers. But if you want to blow the bank, if you want to go for 2 expensive ideas, well, I've got my 9th and 10th recommendations. Number 9 is this here. You'll see it on any kind of my videos, you'll see this. This is an ice maker, and at first I wasn't convinced that I needed an ice maker until I got one. And then as soon as summer rolled around, I have that thing on pretty much all day long. Gives me fresh ice cubes, gives me lots of ice, and especially when you're making cocktails and you're like, you don't want to use like a lot of, like these, you get what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You get 6 cubes here. You don't really want to be using those big ice cubes because they take a long time to make. If you're shaking them, like, it's quite wasteful. Whereas something like that, you can just get a big scoop of ice, throw it in, make a cocktail, and away you go. Especially for like highballs, for like those kind of tiki drinks where you need that ice, you need a lot of ice in it. Those kind of, that's a lifesaver. Those kind of cocktails made so much easier with that. And if you got a home bartender in your life and they have a little home bar setup like this, an ice maker elevates it again. It takes it from being a little home bar into a proper home bar with the addition of those ice cubes, because it's an absolute game changer. Is a bit expensive, but in my mind, totally worth it. And lastly, for another idea that'll maybe be a bit more expensive, but very, very cool, this here. This is a little mini whiskey barrel. This originally held sherry in it, and actually when I got it, it had a little bit of sherry in it, and I can still smell in the wood on that cask. There's still a bit of that, like, I think it was PX sherry in it. A little bit of that influence came through in it. And you can use this for a lot of things. So for me, I have like a house whiskey in here. I refill it every couple of months. And for me, when I want, I will go to it and I will pour myself a little bit of whiskey. If I'm making like an old fashioned, I can say, oh, here's something special. I've got my house whiskey. It's basically just like an infinity bottle where I refill it with different whiskeys I like, but it gives you something a bit different, something a bit fun. I know some people have these and they make cocktails in them. So they'll batch up like a big old fashioned or Negroni or something like that, and they'll leave it in here. They'll put 4 like liters of a cocktail in there and let it age and let that barrel influence come to it, and it makes a cocktail so much better. So if you have a big party coming up, you say, you know what I'll do? I'll make a big old fashioned. I'll put like 4 liters of an old fashioned in there, and then all night people can come along to it and just pour themselves an old fashioned. Simple, but it lets you have this really cool kind of centerpiece to your bar. Again, like the ice maker, a bit expensive, but it adds that centerpiece and just really, really cool. It really stands out. And again, if that kind of home bartender in your life has a lot of things already, this year, they might not have it, and so it could be a good idea. But those are just my ideas for 10 home bartender gifts based on my experience of being a little bit of a home bartender myself. If you've got any good ideas, let me know down in the comments, because anyone out there who is looking for ideas this Christmas would probably be glad to hear from you. But like I said, I'm Matt, I'm the whiskey nerd. I've got no whiskey in my hand, but I do put out whiskey reviews every Wednesday, and I put out cocktail recipes every Friday, and I put out videos like this talking about whiskey, talking about home bartending every now and then on Mondays. So if you want to see more like that, make sure you hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Sláinte.